Number 1. Kaminaljuyu, beneath Guatemala City. Picture yourself standing in a quiet suburb of Guatemala City on a street of concrete houses and parked cars. Beneath your feet lies a city of the dead. Its name is Kaminaljuyu, which in the Quiche's Maya language means the Hill of the Dead. 2,000 years ago, this was one of the largest highland Maya centers in the Americas. More than 200 earthen platform mounds once rose here. Most of them were flattened by bulldozers in the 20th century to make way for housing. What was destroyed can never be studied again. The site was occupied from around 1500 BCE to 900 CE, reaching its peak in the late pre-classic period. Between the late 1930s and 40s, Alfred Kidder, Jesse Jennings, and Edwin Shook excavated its central mounds for the Carnegie Institution of Washington. Inside mounds A and B, they found something disturbing. A central lord had been buried with an escort of sacrificed attendants, people killed so they could accompany the ruler into death. Some of these victims were children and adolescents, laid in careful arrangements around the principal body. The tombs were staggeringly rich. They held jade mosaics, sheets of mica, obsidian blades, and stingray spines, the sharp instruments used to draw blood in ritual. One monument, Stele 11, shows a costume ruler holding what appears to be a sacrificial blade. The wealth came from trade. Kaminaljuyu controlled prized obsidian sources, and that wealth paid for monuments and for death. So why did they kill their own? The mainstream view holds that retainer sacrifice reinforced the idea of divine kingship, binding servants to their lord forever. A second interpretation is gentler. Some of the bodies may be high-status kin who died separately and were reburied together, not killed at all. A third fringe idea claims that Highland Maya ritual was influenced by Old World contact, a notion that has no supporting evidence whatsoever. Around 400 CE, the city changed. Architecture and green obsidian from Teotihuacan in central Mexico appear suddenly, hinting at conquest or an elite takeover from 1,000 kilometers away. Today, rescue archaeologists still strike ancient features when foundations are dug, but the diggers usually win. A metropolis of ritual death lies flattened and paved beneath a living capital of nearly 3 million people, and what waits under the next famous city is even stranger. Number 2. The Shackled Dead of Athens. Now travel to the coast of Athens to the Faliro district where a gleaming modern cultural center rises beside the sea. Before the architects arrived, the archaeologists came, and what they pulled from the ground stopped them cold. In a single mass grave lay at least 80 young men, laid out in a neat row. Around their wrists and arms were iron shackles still clamped shut. Several of their skulls had been shattered by blunt force. These men were executed. The excavation began in 2012 under Stella Chrysoulaki of the Greek Antiquities Service, ahead of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Cultural Center. More than 1,500 burials came out of the ground. But it was the shackled row, reported in 2016, that made headlines around the world. 2 small vases buried among the dead dated the grave to roughly 650 to 625 BCE, the archaic age when Athens was ruled by aristocrats. The bodies told a story of ritualized violence. The men were arranged with care despite their fate, some with arms raised above their heads, hands bound. Analysis of their bones showed they were healthy and well-fed, not starving criminals. These were fit young men, and someone had decided they must die together. The leading explanation reaches back to a famous crime. Around 632 BCE, an Athenian noble named Cylon tried to seize power. His coup failed, and his supporters were killed despite promises of safe passage. The act cursed the family responsible, a stain the ancient writers Herodotus, Thucydides, and Plutarch all recorded. Many scholars believe the shackled dead of Faliro are those very men. A second theory is more cautious. The victims could be executed pirates, rebels, or war captives with no link to Cylon at all. A third possibility is simpler still, that these were criminals of the state, bound and dispatched in a single grim event. What makes the grave so haunting is a small detail. The shackles were left on the bodies at burial. Someone chose to mark these men as condemned even in death, denying them dignity underground. All of it lies directly beneath one of the most modern buildings in Greece. And the next city hides a horror carved into the human body itself. Number 3, the slaughtered soldiers of Luxor. Cross now to Egypt, to the west bank of the Nile opposite the tourist city of Luxor, ancient Thebes. Here, in a dry cliff tomb at Deir el-Bahari, the American archaeologist Herbert Winlock made a grim discovery in the 1920s. Packed into the rock lay the mummified bodies of around 60 men, all of fighting age. They had not died peacefully. They had been killed in battle roughly 4,000 years ago. The men date to the late 11th dynasty, around 2050 to 2000 BCE, and they are tied to the reign of Nebuchadnezzar Mentuhotep II, the king who reunified Egypt after a long collapse. Their wounds are unmistakable. Winlock found arrow points still embedded in bodies, ebony-tipped reed arrows lodged in flesh, and skulls crushed by heavy blows. Some men bore parallel gashes, the marks of being finished off while already down. Others had defensive wounds on their forearms, the injuries of a man raising his arm against a blade. There was another horror. Some of the corpses had been partly eaten by vultures before they were recovered and buried. That detail tells us they lay exposed for a time, most likely at the foot of a fortress wall. Winlock reconstructed the scene as an assault on a fortified town, the attackers cut down by archers on the ramparts before the walls finally fell. Despite dying in a heap, these men were honored. Their linen bandages were marked, their bodies carefully mummified, and they were buried close to the king's own terraced mortuary temple. They were fallen heroes of the war that made Egypt whole again. How should we read this grave? The mainstream view is that they are royal soldiers who died storming a fortress during the reunification. A second interpretation suggests a single catastrophic ambush rather than a drawn-out siege. A third, fringe idea proposes ritual execution, but the wounds are so clearly the chaos of combat that few take it seriously. The tomb is among the earliest direct skeletal evidence of organized Egyptian siege warfare. It is the human cost of a celebrated achievement, the reunification of a kingdom written in shattered skulls and gnawed bone. Just across the river, 500,000 people live in modern Luxor, and millions of tourists pass by each year. Our next site trades the desert for a cold northern grove. Number 4. The Sacred Grove of Uppsala. Imagine a grove of tall trees in the Swedish winter, the branches heavy with something that is not fruit. According to a medieval account, the branches held bodies. Old Uppsala lies just north of the modern university city of Uppsala, marked by 3 enormous royal burial mounds. For 1,000 years it was a center of pagan cult and kingship, and it may have been a place of human sacrifice. Our most vivid source is the German cleric Adam of Bremen, writing around 1070 CE. He described a temple at Uppsala, where every 9th year, 9 males of every species were sacrificed, including humans, and their bodies hung in a sacred grove. A Christian informant told him he had seen as many as 72 carcasses dangling together, men beside horses and dogs. The archaeology gives us a monumental ritual landscape, if not the grove itself. The 3 royal mounds, dug in the 19th century, held cremated elites buried with gold and garnet. Then, between 2012 and 2013, excavations ahead of railway work uncovered rows of massive timber posts forming lines nearly a kilometer long. Archaeologists, including Lena Baronius Jorpeland, documented this vast alignment. Beneath the medieval church, they found the foundation of a great hall and a possible temple platform. Ritual wells held animal bones and offerings. But how much of Adam's grove was real? The mainstream view is careful. Uppsala was genuinely a center of sacrificial cult, but Adam wrote as an outsider trying to paint pagans as barbarians, so the scale of human sacrifice is probably exaggerated. A second interpretation holds that most offerings were animals, with human sacrifice rare and reserved for moments of crisis. The Norse sagas remember King Domalde, offered up by his own people during a famine. A third, literalist reading takes Adam at his word and imagines the grove routinely heavy with human dead. There is a mythic logic beneath it all. Hanging sacrifice was sacred to Odin, the god who in legend hung himself on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 nights to win the runes. To hang a man from a tree was to give him to that god. The sacred grove has never been found by archaeologists, so its hanging bodies remain a horror preserved in ink rather than soil. Nearby, Scandinavia's oldest university has hummed with the learning since 1477. Our next city hides its dead under a genteel English street. Number 5. The Decapitated Gladiators of York. On a pleasant residential street in the English city of York called Driffield Terrace, the ground hides a Roman cemetery unlike almost any other. When York Archaeological Trust excavated here between 2004 and 2005, ahead of new housing, they found around 80 burials. An extraordinary number of the dead had been decapitated. Their heads had been cut off from the front with a bladed weapon, and the skulls were then placed carefully in the grave, on the chest, between the legs, or by the feet. The dead were almost all adult men, taller and more powerfully built than the ordinary Roman-era population. They came from across the empire. Isotope analysis by researchers including Gundula Moldner and Janet Montgomery showed childhood origins ranging far beyond Britain, some from the Mediterranean and beyond. These were not local farmers. They lived violent lives, their bones marked by healed and unhealed injuries. Then, in 2025, a single skeleton rewrote the story. Large carnivore bite marks were found scored across its pelvis, the teeth of a lion, tiger, or bear. Reported in the journal PebleOS 1 by Tim Thompson and colleagues, it was described as the first direct physical evidence of human and animal gladiatorial combat anywhere in Roman Europe. Abstract history suddenly became a real man, mauled by a big cat in an arena. York, known to the Romans as Aberracum, was no backwater. The Emperor Septimius Severus died here in 211 CE, and Constantine was proclaimed emperor here in 306 CE. So who were these headless men? The leading interpretation is that this was a cemetery of gladiators. A second reading suggests a military execution ground, where soldiers and prisoners were beheaded. A third, mixed view, sees a marginal cemetery for a specific group who practiced decapitation as a burial rite. Ligature marks and iron rings on a few bodies hint at captivity or slavery. Whatever the truth, the decapitations were delivered at or just after death, a final blow to a defeated fighter. The bones are now among the best-studied Roman remains in Britain, examined through facial reconstruction and ancient DNA. Above them, a walled tourist city of 200,000 markets its Roman and Viking past. The next city carries us back nearly 1,000,000 years to a cave that started a war over what makes us human. Number 6. Peking Man, beneath Beijing. About 42 kilometers southwest of central Beijing rises a limestone hill the locals once called Dragon Bone Hill. Its true name is Zhoukoudian, and from the 1920s onward it gave up the fossils of an early human, Homo erectus pekinensis, known as Peking Man. These people lived here between roughly 780,000 and 400,000 years ago. And almost from the start, one scientist accused them of eating each other. The excavators were pioneers, among them Davidson Black, Otto Zdonsky, and Pei Wenzhong, who found the first skull cap in 1929. Later, the anatomist Franz Weidenreich studied the collection. He noticed something odd. The remains of around 40 individuals were disproportionately skulls, with very few limb bones, and the openings at the base of the skulls seemed enlarged. Weidenreich concluded that the brains had been extracted, that Peking Man was a headhunter feeding on his own kind. Then, in the chaos of 1941, the priceless original fossils vanished while being moved for safekeeping during the Japanese invasion. They were never recovered. Only plaster casts survive, which makes every later argument harder to settle. And the argument raged. A second interpretation, championed by tophonymists like C.K. Brain and later Noel Boaz and Russell Seo-chan, pointed the finger at an animal. A gigantic extinct hyena called Pachikro kuta could crack skulls and drag bones into caves, producing exactly the pattern Weidenreich blamed on cannibals. Even the famous evidence of controlled fire at Zhoukoudian, thick layers of ash and burned bone, has been questioned as possibly natural or washed in from elsewhere. So where does the science stand now? The mainstream modern view is that cannibalism is unproven. Hyena scavenging combined with poor preservation likely explains the skull-heavy assemblage. A second position keeps the door open, allowing that early humans may have occasionally processed their dead. A third, fringe echo of the old idea, still imagines a cannibal ape man, a myth popularized in mid-century writing. The stone tools scattered through the cave confirm that early humans were here, whatever befell the bodies. Modern dating published in 2009 pushed some layers back to around 700 to 70,000 years. It remains a textbook puzzle in how to tell human violence from an animal's jaws. An hour's drive away, a capital of over 21 million people goes about its day. Our next stop is the tomb of a man who tried to take his whole world into death. Number 7. The first emperor's tomb beneath Xian. Outside the modern Chinese city of Xian lies the greatest tomb complex in Asia, the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. He died in 210 BCE. In 1974, farmers digging a well struck the terracotta army, thousands of clay soldiers standing guard. But behind that famous wonder lies a darker story of the humans who died for it. Our key witness is the historian Sima Qian, writing around 100 BCE in his records of the Grand Historian. He states plainly that when the emperor died, his childless concubines were ordered to follow him into death. He also records that the craftsmen who built the tomb's inner mechanisms were sealed inside so that the secrets and treasures they knew could never be revealed. They were entombed alive with the emperor's corpse. The archaeology supports a grim human cost. Satellite pits around the tomb have yielded human remains interpreted as sacrificed or executed. Near the mausoleum, at a place called Zhao Beihu, a mass grave held the skeletons of tomb builders, some likely convict laborers who died during construction. Sima Qian claims 700,000 conscripted workers labored here over decades. There is more. Sima Qian described rivers of mercury inside the tomb, representing the waterways of the empire. Soil surveys around the mound have detected abnormally high mercury concentrations, a striking confirmation of a text written 2,000 years ago. The central tomb remains deliberately unexcavated, both to preserve it and because of that mercury. How much of this really happened? The mainstream view accepts that concubines were sacrificed and laborers died, though the exact scale is debated. A second interpretation cautions that some burials read as sacrifice may be later intrusive graves or victims of the violent power struggle that followed the emperor's death. A third, fringe claim insists the sealed craftsmen and untouched treasures still lie perfectly preserved, a story impossible to verify without opening the tomb. The 8,000 terracotta figures were themselves a kind of mercy. Earlier, Shang and Zhou, kings, had practiced mass human sacrifice at their burials. The clay army was partly a substitute, effigies standing in for the living. And yet the texts tell us real people still died. Above it all, Xian, a city of over 12 million, has built its modern identity on this necropolis. The next horror is measured not in soldiers, but in the smallest bodies of all. Number 8. The Tophet of Carthage, beneath Tunis. In a quiet seaside suburb of Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, stands a field of carved stone markers. This is the Tophet of Carthage, and beneath the stele lie thousands of clay urns. Inside those urns are the cremated remains of infants and small children, buried here across 6 centuries. It is the most notorious sacrifice debate in the entire ancient world. Excavations began in the 1920s and revealed urns stacked in layer upon layer. The deposits run from around the 8th century BCE down to 146 BCE, the year Rome destroyed Carthage. Estimates suggest the remains of many thousands of children lie here. Above the urns, stone stelae bear dedications to the god Baal-Hamon and the goddess Tanit, marking vows that had been fulfilled. Ancient writers left chilling accounts. Diodorus Siculus claimed that in 310 BCE, as the tyrant Agathocles of Syracuse besieged the city, panicked, Carthaginian elites sacrificed 500 children to appease the gods. Others described a bronze figure over a fire. But were these children truly sacrificed? This is where scholars go to war. One camp, led by the archaeologist Lawrence Steger, who excavated the Tophet in the 1970s, argues for genuine sacrifice, citing the ages of the dead and the vow inscriptions. A second camp argues the opposite, that the Tophet was simply a cemetery for infants who died naturally in an age of terrible infant mortality, gathered in a sacred precinct. A third position tries to hold both, and a 2014 study in the journal Antiquity by Josephine Quinn and colleagues concluded that the combined evidence supports real, if occasional, sacrifice, alongside the burial of some naturally deceased infants. The dispute is fierce because the stakes are high. Roman propaganda after the Punic Wars had every reason to paint their defeated enemy as child killers. Yet nearly identical sacred precincts, also called Tophets, appear at other Phoenician sites across the Mediterranean, at Motia, Tharos, and Sulcis, suggesting a shared and deliberate practice. The very name Tophet was borrowed by modern scholars from the Bible, from a place in the valley of Hinnom near Jerusalem. That is no accident, and it is where we are going next. For now, remember the image. Beneath a peaceful modern suburb, the small cremated dead lie stacked in the earth, at the heart of an argument that has never been settled. Our next city gave the world its very word for hell. Number 9. The sacrificed children of Mexico City. Beneath the pavement of Mexico City, one of the largest urban areas on Earth, lie the twin Aztec cities of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco. In 1978, electrical workers digging near the main square struck a huge carved stone showing the dismembered goddess Coyolxauhqui. That accident led archaeologists straight to the Templo Mayor, the great temple at the heart of the Aztec world. What they found in its offering caches included the bones of sacrificed children. The Aztecs sacrificed children to specific gods. Above all, they were given to Tlaloc, the rain god, and to Ericatl, the wind god, whose round temple stood at Tlatelolco. The belief was direct and terrible. The tears of a weeping child would bring the rain. Children with certain birth signs or a particular cowlick in their hair were chosen. Excavations around the wind god's temple at Tlatelolco, including work led by Salvador Guillem Arroyo in the 2000s, uncovered the remains of dozens of children. In one deposit, many appear to have been sacrificed in a single event. They were accompanied by offerings, greenstone beads, and ceramic vessels. Some seem to have been drowned or had their throats cut, methods fitting for gods of water and rain. The context may be a real catastrophe. Aztec records remember a great drought between 1450 and 1454 CE, a famine so severe that people sold themselves into slavery to survive. Intensified sacrifice to end that drought would explain a mass offering of children to the rain god. How certain is all this? The mainstream view is firm. Aztec child sacrifice to water and rain deities is well documented, both in the ground and in written sources. The Spanish chroniclers Bernardino de Sahagún and Diego Duran described it in detail, though as hostile colonizers their numbers must be treated with caution. A second, more careful position accepts that sacrifice occurred, but debates the interpretation of specific mass child events. A third, fringe stance, either denies sacrifice altogether or inflates the Spanish body counts beyond all reason. Nearby, the same temple precinct later gave up the Huaytzompantli, a rack of hundreds of adult skulls excavated from 2015. Tlatelolco itself is layered with tragedy, the site of the last Aztec stand against Cortes in 1521, and of a massacre in 1968. The children offered to bring rain lie meters below a thirsty modern megacity. The next valley named the underworld itself. Number 10. The Valley of Hinnom, beneath Jerusalem. Wrapped around the southern edge of Jerusalem's old city runs a valley with a dark name. In Hebrew, it is the Valley of the son of Hinnom, in Greek, Gehenna. From that single valley, the world took its word for hell, and the reason is a place the Bible calls the Tophet, where children were said to be passed through fire. The Hebrew Bible condemns this Tophet again and again. In the books of 2 Kings and Jeremiah, the valley is where people burned their sons and daughters as offerings to the gods Moloch and Baal. The kings Ahaz and Manasseh are both accused of sacrificing their own children there. Around 622 BCE, King Josiah of Judah launched a religious reform and deliberately defiled the Tophet to stamp the practice out. Over time, the valley's reputation curdled into something eternal. Gehenna became the Jewish and later Christian name for a place of fiery punishment. A medieval tradition, often traced to the scholar David Kimhie around 1200 CE, claimed the valley had become a perpetually burning garbage dump, which deepened the association with hell, though no ancient source confirms it. Here's the twist. The hard archaeological evidence for child sacrifice in the valley is thin. Unlike Carthage, no confirmed field of sacrificial urns has been excavated here. What has been found tells a more layered story. In 1979, the archaeologist Gabriel Barkay excavated burial caves at a spot called Katif Hinnom, on the valley's shoulder. There, he found 2 tiny silver scrolls inscribed with a priestly blessing, dated to around 600 BCE, the oldest known text from the Bible. So the valley held elite tombs, not only horror. How real was the sacrifice? The mainstream view is that child sacrifice in the valley is attested in the text and is historically plausible, even if firm physical proof is missing. A second interpretation reads the biblical accusations largely as polemic, hostile propaganda against rival Canaanite cults. A third, fringe position, either takes the perpetual hellfire literally or denies any sacrificial history at all. The word Moloch is itself disputed. Punic inscriptions suggest it may name a type of sacrifice rather than a god, and the shared name Tophet ties this valley directly to Carthage, hinting at one Levantine tradition stretched across the sea. Beneath the walls of a city holy to three faiths, the valley that named Hell still lies open to the sky. Our final horror is the quietest of all, a dark pit in the center of Rome. Number 11. The Tullianum, beneath Rome. At the foot of the Capitoline Hill, beside the ruins of the Roman Forum that millions of tourists visit each year, there is a small stone doorway. Behind it, stairs lead down into a chamber older than almost anything around it. This is the Tullianum, later called the Mamertine prison. In its original form, the lower room was a bottle-shaped pit, and prisoners were lowered into the darkness through a single hole in the ceiling. It was where Rome killed its enemies. Tradition credits its building to the early kings Ancus Marcius and Servius Tullius in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE. The historian Sallust described it with disgust as a foul, dark, stinking place, repulsive and fearsome to behold. It was not a prison for serving sentences. It was a place of detention and execution, and the deaths there were intimate. Prisoners were strangled with a cord or simply left to starve in the pit. The list of the dead reads like a roll call of Rome's defeated foes. Vercingetorix, the Gaulish chieftain who nearly beat Julius Caesar, was held for years and then strangled here in 46 BCE after being paraded through Caesar's triumph. The Numidian king Jugurtha was thrown into the pit in 104 BCE and starved to death, reportedly joking about how cold it was. In 63 BCE, the conspirators of Catiline were executed in this chamber under the consulship of Cicero. Half a century later, the fallen official Sejanus and his children met their end in connection with it. The strangling of a captured king was not hidden. It was the deliberate, grim finale of a Roman triumph, a spectacle of imperial power staged for the crowd. Why so public? The mainstream reading is that these were genuine state executions, well documented across Republican and early imperial history. A second interpretation notes that some later traditions attached to the site, such as the imprisonment of the apostles Peter and Paul, are pious legend rather than proven fact. A third, fringe version imagines mass executions far beyond the recorded political victims. A Christian church, San Giuseppe dei Falegnami, was later built directly above the pit, and it became a place of pilgrimage. But the horror beneath is older and colder. The eternal city of nearly 3 million people treads daily above the black cell where Rome quietly strangled its enemies in the dark. Step back from these 11 graves and a pattern comes into focus. Atrocity clusters beneath famous cities for a reason. People settle where the land is good, near water, on defensible ground, along trade routes, and they stay for thousands of years. Each generation builds on the ruins of the last. Sacred and civic centers are reused until the ground becomes a layered cake of occupation, a tell thick with debris and burials. Capitals concentrate wealth and power, and with power comes the ritual violence that once legitimized it. The sacrifice sealed a temple. The execution warned the crowd. The offering bought the rain. So the seats of power became the reservoirs of horror, and the dead beneath a capital are not only victims, they are a cross-section of an entire ancient society, the ordinary buried right beside the sacrificed, infants in simple pots lying near men in iron shackles. We keep finding these dead because we keep digging. Modern infrastructure is an accidental excavator. A cultural center in Athens, a rail line in Uppsala, a subway and a power cable in Mexico City all have plunged into ancient death. But the same development that reveals the past also destroys it. At Kaminaljuyu, bulldozers flattened 200 mounds faster than anyone could record them. Notice where the killing happened. Executions and sacrifices often sat at the edges of cities, in valleys, and harbors, or at the symbolic heart, like the pit beside the Roman Forum. And notice how the same ideas recur across cultures that never met. The word Tophet marks child sacrifice in both Carthage and Jerusalem. Continuity of place is the reason the horror is not far away. It is directly, vertically, right beneath us. How can anyone claim to know what happened tens of centuries ago from a heap of bones? The answer is a science called taphonomy. The the study of everything that happens to remains between death and discovery. It is what separates a sober conclusion from a lurid guess. The central problem is telling human violence from everything else. At Jokudian, the whole cannibalism debate hangs on whether broken skulls were smashed by people or cracked by a giant hyena. Researchers look for the fine signatures. A clean cut from the front of the neck means blade decapitation, as at York. Blunt force to the skull suggests execution, as at Falaran. An arrow point in a rib and a defensive wound on a forearm mean combat, as at Luxor. Other tools reach further. The age profile of the dead fuels the Carthage debate whether the children died naturally or were selected. Strontium and oxygen isotopes locked in tooth enamel reveal where a person grew up, which is how we know York's dead came from across the empire. Ancient DNA reconstructs ancestry and sex. Mercury surveys of the soil tested Sima Qian's claim about the first emperor's tomb, and the mercury was there. Radiocarbon dating and tree ring dating fixed the age of timber and deposits, which is how the long post rows at Uppsala were tied to the late Iron Age. For deep time, a method using aluminum and beryllium isotopes dated the Peking man layers to around 770,000 years, and when an arrangement is too fragile to dig in the field, whole blocks of soil are lifted and excavated slowly in a laboratory, as they were at Falaran. Sources must be weighed too. Hostile chroniclers exaggerate, and the absence of evidence, like Jerusalem's missing urn field, is not the same as evidence of absence. Peer review does the rest as the papers of 2014 and 2025 refined old conclusions. The science turns a pile of bones into a testable story. For all that science can do, the honest answer to most of these mysteries is that we are not sure. Consider how much remains open. Was the Carthage Tophet a place of mass sacrifice, an ordinary infant cemetery, or a blend of both? Did Peking man truly eat his own kind, or did hyenas break those skulls? Are the shackled dead of Athens really Cylon's conspirators, or executed pirates and rebels with no connection to that famous crime? The questions multiply. How literally should we take Adam of Bremen and his grove of 72 hanging bodies? Was Driefield Terrace a graveyard of gladiators, or a military execution ground? Did children truly burn in the valley of Hinnom, or is that biblical horror mostly propaganda against a rival cult? How many concubines and laborers actually died at the first emperor's tomb, and where exactly was Uppsala's sacred grove, which has never been located? Some answers may be lost forever. The original Peking man fossils vanished in wartime, and casts can only show so much. Development destroys evidence before the questions can even be asked. And every new method, every isotope study and DNA sequence and scan, tends to reopen cases that seemed closed and raise fresh doubts. The record beneath our cities is partial, biased, and still being read. Certainty is far rarer than the documentaries suggest, and that uncertainty is its own kind of unease. So here is where we end, standing on a city street that is really a ceiling. Every famous city in this story is a floor laid over older, darker rooms. Millions of people commute and shop and sleep above execution pits and sacrifice fields, and the distance between them and these atrocities is not only time. It is a few meters of earth straight down. The victims were not monsters or abstractions. They were children offered for rain, soldiers cut down at a wall, captives strangled in the dark, concubines who could not refuse. And their killers were not cartoon villains. They believed they were doing right, buying the harvest, honoring a king, pleasing a god, keeping order. That is the most unsettling part. That horror once felt like duty. Preservation is mostly luck. The dry cliff kept Luxor's soldiers, the sealed cave kept Peking man, the sacred precinct kept Carthage's urns. Most of the ancient dead are simply gone. What survives beneath our capitals is only a fraction of what happened there. Whole cities of the dead, like Kaminaljuyu, were bulldozed before anyone could read them, and we will never know everything they held. To know a city's foundations is to know its buried violence, and to choose whether to remember it. The past is not somewhere else. It is underfoot, humming quietly beneath the traffic and the tourists. These are not distant horrors. They are local, they are close, and they are right beneath us.